She had already decided. Before he sat down, before a single question was asked, before one piece of evidence was placed on that pale ash desk, Diana Voss looked at Marcus Cole, a 17-year-old black boy in a navy blazer, a scholarship student who rode the metro to school while his classmates arrived in imported cars. And she had already decided. 3 witness statements, all filed within 11 minutes of each other, all from the same group of friends. No footage, no fingerprints, no recovered device. Nothing but a name. His name. And in that office, in that school built on plaques and donations and the quiet assumption that some students belong and others are guests who should remain grateful, Marcus sat very still. The way you learn to sit when stillness is the only safe thing available to you. He asked for one phone call. What walked through that door 22 minutes later? Nobody in that building was ready for. A black Rolls-Royce. A man in a dark suit, collar open, tattoos climbing his neck toward his jaw. Not loud, not threatening, just still. The way people are still when they have never once needed to prove that the room belongs to them. The Korean Mafia boss looked at the woman behind the desk, and in a voice that didn't rise, didn't shake, didn't perform a single moment of what he was feeling, he said, "Show me the evidence." What happened next didn't just change that afternoon. It revealed something about that school, that office, and that system that was always true, and that everyone had been too comfortable to say out loud. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in rooms where decisions have already been made. It is not the silence of waiting. It is not the silence of consideration. It is the silence of performance, of people arranging their faces into shapes that resemble fairness, while their hands are already reaching for the conclusion they arrived at before anyone sat down. Diana Voss had that silence. She had practiced it for 19 years. She kept it behind a desk of pale ashwood, beneath diplomas arranged with a kind of deliberate care that says, "I worked for this," and above a small gold nameplate that said, Director of Student Affairs, which was a title that sounded like help and functioned like a wall. She was looking at Marcus Cole. Marcus was 17 years old and sitting very still, the way people sit when they have learned that stillness is the only safe posture available to them. He was wearing his school blazer, dark navy, gold crest on the breast pocket, the uniform of a place that had let him in on the condition that he remain grateful for it. His hands were folded on his lap. His eyes were calm in the practiced way of someone suppressing something enormous. He had been called out of his last class of the day. He had not been told why. He found out when he sat down across from Diana Voss, and she looked at him with the expression of someone delivering bad news they have already made peace with, and she said, in a voice designed to sound reluctant, "Marcus, we need to talk about the missing laptop from Lab 7. What she did not say, what she did not need to say, because the architecture of the moment said it for her, was that the conversation was already over. That 3 students had given statements. That those students were Tyler Harmon and 2 of his closest friends, which was a detail she did not offer. That the timestamps on those statements were filed within 11 minutes of each other, which was another detail she did not offer. That there was no physical evidence, no recovered device, no footage, no fingerprints, and no reason to summon Marcus Cole specifically, except that someone had said his name and she had written it down. But Marcus already knew how this worked. He had known since he was 9 years old, in a different school, in a different city, when a teacher had looked at him across a classroom and chosen him with her eyes before a single question was asked. He had known it the way some children know things, not from being taught, but from being shown, repeatedly, until the lesson becomes part of the body. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He asked, quietly, if he could make a phone call. Diana Voss said yes, because saying no would have complicated the paperwork. Marcus took out his phone. He scrolled to a contact labeled with a single character. Not a name, not a title, just a symbol. The kind of label that tells you the relationship is too layered for a word. He pressed call. It rang twice. The voice that answered was low and unhurried, the voice of a man for whom urgency is a choice rather than a reflex. Marcus said, "Appa, they're saying I stole something. I didn't." There was a pause on the line. Not a pause of doubt, not a pause of calculation. A pause of the particular kind that belongs to someone deciding not to say 3 of the 4 things they are thinking. Then the voice said, "Don't say anything else. I'm coming." Marcus looked down at his folded hands. Outside the window behind Diana Voss's head, the afternoon light was going gold, the way it does in Los Angeles in the early evening. Warm and indifferent and beautiful, falling equally on everything, regardless of what was happening underneath it. He had called his father. He did not know, sitting in that chair, whether that would make things better or whether it would make things complicated in a different way entirely. He did not know what walked through doors when Pak Jin-ho walked through them. He did not know what rooms became. He would find out in 22 minutes. There is a sound that expensive cars make when they stop that cheaper cars do not make. It is not the engine. It is the absence of engine. The way the sound simply ceases, cleanly, without shudder or complaint, as though the machine has been trained to be discreet. The black Rolls-Royce that pulled up to the front entrance of Westlake Preparatory Academy made that sound at 4:47 in the afternoon, and the security guard at the front desk heard it through the glass and looked up from his monitor without knowing why. He saw the car first. Then he saw the man who stepped out of it. Park Jin-ho was 52 years old and moved like a man who had never once in his adult life needed to rush. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat, and above that collar, climbing the left side of his neck toward the jaw, were tattoos. Not decorative, not fashionable, but the kind that are earned in rooms that do not have windows. The kind that means something specific to the people who know what they mean. His hair was silver at the temples. His face was composed. He did not look at the building the way visitors look at buildings. He looked at it the way people look at problems they are about to solve. He did not stop at the security desk. He did not sign the visitor log. He walked through the lobby as though the lobby had been built for him to walk through. And the security guard, a man who had once worked corrections and had developed a precise instinct for which confrontations were worth having, watched him go and decided, quietly and without drama, that this was not one of them. The school secretary outside Diana Voss's office stood up when he entered the waiting area. She began a sentence about appointments. He looked at her, not unkindly, and the sentence did not finish. He knocked once on the director's door. He opened it before anyone answered. Diana Voss looked up from her desk. She took in the man in the doorway, the suit, the stillness, the tattoos, the expression that was not hostile and not warm and not anything she had a prepared response for, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear, exactly. Something adjacent to it. The sudden awareness that she had been operating inside an assumption, and the assumption had just left the room. Marcus was still sitting in the chair across from her desk. He looked at his father. Something in his posture changed. Not relief, not quite, but the particular adjustment of someone who has been holding weight alone and has just felt another pair of hands arrive. Park Jin-ho stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He sat down in the empty chair beside his son without being invited to, and he looked at Diana Voss with an expression of absolute patience. The kind of patience that is not gentle. And he said, "Tell me what the evidence is." Diana Voss straightened. She reached for the familiar architecture of her authority. The desk, the diplomas, the nameplate, the 19 years. She explained about the laptop. She explained about the witness statements. She used words like protocol and procedure and due diligence, words that are designed to make a process sound inevitable rather than chosen. Park Jin-ho listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "How many witnesses?" She said 3. He said, "Who are they?" She hesitated. She said that student names were confidential in an ongoing inquiry. He said, "My son's name is not confidential. You called him by name when you summoned him here. You will tell me the names of the people accusing him." The room was very quiet. Diana Voss looked at this man and understood, with the slow clarity of someone who has just stepped onto ice and felt it shift, that the tools she normally used in this office, tone, title, the gentle pressure of institutional authority, were not going to function here. Not because he was threatening her. He had not raised his voice. He had not moved toward her. He had not done anything that could be written down. He had simply asked a question and waited for the answer with the particular stillness of someone who already knows that waiting costs him nothing. She said Tyler Harmon's name. She said the others. Park Jin-ho nodded. Once. He took out his phone. He made a call in Korean. 3 sentences, his voice low. He listened. He ended the call. The entire thing took 40 seconds. Then he placed his phone face down on the corner of her desk. A gesture that was not aggressive and was not casual. That was simply the gesture of a man setting something down while he finished what he came to do. And he said, "I would like Tyler Harmon brought to this office." Diana Voss said that was highly irregular. Park Jin-ho said, "So is accusing a student without evidence. I'd like to discuss both." Tyler Harmon had never been called to the director's office before. This was not because he had never done anything worth being called for. It was because there is a category of student at schools like Westlake Preparatory Academy who exists slightly outside the reach of consequences. Not untouchable, exactly, but cushioned, the way certain objects are cushioned in transit, wrapped in layers of context that absorb the impact before it arrives. Tyler's father had donated the new science wing 3 years ago. His name was on a plaque beside the door of Lab 7, the same Lab 7 where the laptop had gone missing. This was a detail that no one in the building had paused to consider, because some details are so obvious they become invisible. Tyler walked into Diana Voss's office with the easy confidence of someone who has been called to receive good news. He was tall, blonde, wearing his uniform with the particular looseness of a person who has never needed to use it as armor. He saw Marcus first, still in his chair. He saw the director behind her desk. Then he saw the man sitting beside Marcus, and the easy confidence underwent a rapid, involuntary revision. Park Jin-ho did not look at Tyler when he entered. He was looking at his phone. He let Tyler stand there for a moment. Not long, 6 or 7 seconds. But 6 or 7 seconds in a silent room with a man who is not looking at you is a very specific kind of experience. And then he looked up. He said, Sit down. Tyler looked at Diana Voss. Diana Voss, who had spent 19 years being the authority in this room, found that she did not intervene. She told herself this was because she was allowing the situation to develop. She did not examine that explanation closely. Tyler sat down. Park Jin-ho turned his phone around and placed it on the desk so the screen faced Tyler. On the screen was a document, an access log, the kind generated automatically by the electronic key system installed on every laboratory door at Westlake Prep. The kind that records badge number, timestamp, and duration every time a door is opened. The system had been installed 2 years ago as part of a security upgrade. It ran quietly in the background. Nobody thought about it very much. Tyler looked at the screen. The log showed 2 entries for Lab 7 on the afternoon in question. The first was at 2:53, a duration of 4 minutes. The second was at 3:17, a duration of 11 minutes. The first badge number belonged to a student whose name Park Jin-ho did not say aloud, because he did not need to. The second badge number was Tyler Harmon's. Marcus had been in the library from 2:41 to 3:31. The library had its own log. It also had a librarian who had signed 3 books out to Marcus during that window, and would remember him specifically because he had asked a question about the periodical archive that she had found genuinely interesting. The laptop had disappeared during the 11-minute window. Tyler stared at the screen. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, because guilt requires a moment of reckoning, and Tyler Harmon had not yet arrived at that moment. But something closer to the sudden awareness that the geometry of the situation had changed entirely, and he had not been told. He said, I went back to get my notebook. Park Jin-ho said, for 11 minutes. Tyler said, I was looking for it. Park Jin-ho said, in the laptop cabinet. The room held the silence. Diana Voss was very still behind her desk. She was looking at the access log on the phone screen with the expression of someone watching a floor they have been standing on reveal itself to be a different floor than they believed. She had 3 signed witness statements in a folder on her desk. She had called a scholarship student out of class, sat him across from her, and begun building toward an outcome. The witness statements had been filed within 11 minutes of each other. She had not noted that at the time. She was noting it now, in the way that people note things they should have noted earlier, quietly and without advertising the calculation. She said, Marcus, I want to say, Park Jin-ho said, in a moment. He was still looking at Tyler. He said, and his voice was exactly as calm as it had been since he walked through the door, which was somehow worse than if it had changed. You told this office that you saw my son near the cabinet. You told 2 of your friends to say the same thing. You did this knowing that your badge had opened that door. You did this knowing that his had not. Tyler opened his mouth. Park Jin-ho said, don't answer that here. Answer it to yourself. Tonight. And decide what kind of person you are going to be after today. He picked up his phone. He stood. He looked at Diana Voss for a long moment. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something that was perhaps more difficult to receive than either, which was simple clarity. And he said, you were about to expel my son. Based on the word of the boy who opened that door. I would like you to think carefully about why his word was sufficient and my son's was not. I would like you to think about that after we leave, and I would like it to change something about how this office operates. Diana Voss said nothing. He turned to Marcus. He did not say, let's go, or come on, or any of the things people say when they are performing a departure. He simply stood, and Marcus stood with him, and they walked to the door together. The hallway outside Diana Voss's office was empty. It was the particular emptiness of institutional spaces in the late afternoon, after the noise of the day has moved on, and before the cleaning crews arrive. A suspended quality, the fluorescent lights humming at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious hearing. The lockers standing in their rows like witnesses who have agreed not to speak. The carpet was the color of something that had once had a color and had since negotiated a compromise with time. Marcus walked beside his father and did not say anything. This was not because he had nothing to say. It was because there are moments that exist in a register beyond language. Moments where the body knows something the mind has not yet finished processing, and speaking too soon would reduce them to something smaller than they are. He had watched his father walk into that room. He had watched him sit down. He had watched him dismantle, methodically and without cruelty, the entire architecture of a conclusion that had been built around Marcus's name while Marcus sat there, unable to stop it. And he had felt something that he did not have a clean word for. Not pride exactly, not relief exactly. Something older than both. Something that lived in the part of the chest that tightens when you realize you are not alone in a way you had forgotten was possible. They pushed through the heavy front doors, and the evening air of Los Angeles met them. Warm and faintly particulate, carrying the smell of cut grass from the athletic fields, and something floral from the landscaping that the school maintained with the same careful attention it gave to its reputation. The Rolls-Royce was at the curb. The driver did not get out. Park Jin-ho stopped on the top step and looked down at the street, and Marcus stopped beside him. A moment passed. Then Marcus said, "How did you get the access log that fast?" Park Jin-ho was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I know someone who knows someone." Marcus nodded slowly. "Right." Another moment. A car moved through the intersection at the end of the block. Somewhere on the athletic fields, a whistle blew and then stopped. Marcus said, "You didn't have to come." Park Jin-ho turned and looked at his son. Really looked at him, in the direct and unguarded way that does not happen often between fathers and sons, especially fathers and sons who have spent years at a careful and mutually agreed-upon distance from each other's lives. He looked at the blazer with the gold crest. He looked at the expression on Marcus's face, which was trying to be neutral and was not quite succeeding. He looked at the boy who carried his eyes and his mother's mouth, and 17 years of a life that Park Jin-ho had observed from further away than he should have. He said, "You called me." Marcus said, "You're my father." The words landed in the space between them and did not echo, and did not disappear. They stayed there, simply and completely, the way true things stay when they are finally said in the open air. Park Jin-ho looked back at the street. Something moved in his face. Not dramatically, not the way faces move in performances of emotion, but the small and almost imperceptible movement of a man releasing something he has been holding for a long time, like a hand slowly unclenching in the dark. He said, "I know." He said, "I should have made it easier for you to call me." Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked down at the steps, then back up at the street, then at his father. He said, "Yeah." And then, after a moment, "But I called." Park Jin-ho put his hand on his son's shoulder. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not held long. It was the gesture of a man who has spent decades in rooms where touch means territory or threat, placing his hand on the shoulder of the one person in the world for whom it means neither. Placing it there in front of a school that had just tried to take something from his son, in front of the street and the evening light and whatever version of the world was watching. He left it there for 3 seconds. Then he took it away. He said, "Come, I'll have you driven home." They walked down the steps together toward the car, and the school stood behind them the way institutions stand, large and permanent, and entirely convinced of its own authority, and neither of them looked back at it. Tyler Harmon was suspended for 2 weeks pending investigation. The laptop was recovered from a storage bag in his gym locker 4 days later by a staff member who had been asked to look carefully. The school sent Marcus's family a letter describing the resolution as the result of a thorough internal review. The letter did not include the word apology. It did not include the word sorry. It included the phrase, "We remain committed to a fair and equitable environment for all students," which is the kind of sentence that institutions write when they want to close a door without admitting it was ever open. Marcus read the letter once, folded it, and put it in the back of a drawer. He did not take his scholarship from Westlake Prep. He finished the year. He did well, the way people do well when they have decided that the best answer to a system that underestimated them is to become impossible to ignore. He spoke to his father on the phone twice a week after that. Not long calls, not easy calls, exactly. There were years between them that did not dissolve overnight, silences that still had texture, questions that neither of them had fully learned how to ask. But the calls happened, regularly, in the way that things happen when someone has decided they will not stop happening. Park Jin-ho never came back to the school. He did not need to. There is a particular kind of presence that certain people leave in rooms long after they have left them. Not a threat, not a warning, but a memory of what it felt like when someone walked in and refused to accept the shape of things as given. Diana Voss felt it every time she sat behind her pale ash desk after that. Whether it changed her, whether it changed the office, whether the next scholarship student called in without evidence received a different kind of silence. Those are questions that do not have clean answers, because institutions change slowly and reluctantly, and usually only under continued pressure. And a single afternoon rarely finishes the work. But it begins it. That is the thing about moments like the one that happened in that office on that ordinary Thursday afternoon in Los Angeles. They do not resolve everything. They do not fix the system. They do not reach backward and undo the accumulation of small decisions and structural assumptions and unconscious conclusions that made Marcus Cole the obvious suspect before a single question was asked. They do not make the next Marcus Cole safe. They do not make the next Tyler Harmon accountable. They do not make the next Diana Voss pause at the right moment. But a father walked through a door, and a boy who had spent 17 years learning to sit very still in rooms that had already decided about him, watched someone stand between him and the conclusion, and heard his own name spoken by the one person who said it like it was not in question. And he called again the following Tuesday, just to talk. That, too, is how things begin. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt that the decision about you had already been made? Not because of what you did, but because of what you look like, where you come from, or who people assumed you were? And if someone unexpected, someone the world had already labeled and dismissed, was the only one willing to stand between you and an injustice, would you have let them? Or would their reputation have made you doubt the protection? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the kind of love that shows up even when it's complicated, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.